Erwin Chargaff's research paved the way for the discoveries of DNA structure and its method of replication. His observation that DNA varies from species to species made it highly credible that DNA was genetic material. His identification of one-to-one ratios in DNA's bases allowed James Watson and Francis Crick to see how these bases slotted into the double helix and how DNA could act as a template for copies of itself. Beginnings. Erwin Chargaff was born into a wealthy family on August 11, 1905, in the city of Czernowitz, one of the provincial capitals of Austria-Hungary. The city is now in Ukraine. Erwin's father was Hermann Chargaff, who owned a small, private bank. His mother was Rosa Silberstein. Both of his parents were well-educated, German-speaking Austrian Jews. They had 2 children, Erwin and his younger sister Greta. Erwin enjoyed a comfortable childhood, although he worried his parents by taking a long time to learn to speak. The family home was furnished with a small library, whose books were a source of constant fascination and inspiration for Erwin as he grew up. When Erwin was 5, his father's bank ran into financial difficulties. Money had been embezzled by employees, and his father had to look for a job. World War I began in July 1914. The Chargaffs were vacationing at a Baltic Sea resort when reports came to them that the Russian army was about to capture Czernowitz. Abandoning any hope of returning home, they made other plans: Vienna, school, and culture. They headed for Vienna, Austria's capital city. Erwin arrived in Vienna on about his 9th birthday and came to regard it as his hometown. He was educated at one of Vienna's best schools, the Maximilians Gymnasium, and loved it. He was taught Greek and Latin, excelling in both languages. Ironically, for someone who took such a long time to speak his first words, he turned out to be extraordinarily gifted at learning new languages. He would eventually master 15. The school did not teach much physics, and there was no chemistry at all. Science was mostly restricted to natural history. Away from school, Erwin joined the Boy Scouts and continued to read avidly, getting through most of Western classical literature. Erwin spent unforgettable evenings listening to operas and seeing Mozart's works conducted by Richard Strauss. He would wander through Vienna's streets in the evening with his friend Albert Fuchs discussing literature and poetry. He particularly admired the works of Karl Kraus, who has been described as the master of venomous ridicule, and would attend recitals by Kraus himself. University. Reveling in all things intellectual, Erwin Chargaff was clearly destined for academia. At the age of 18, however, he was still unsure about what he should study. He did not think he would make a good physician. He hated the idea of becoming a teacher. Law was good only for doing business, and he found commerce unattractive. In the end, he chose chemistry because he knew nothing about it. Moreover, a rich uncle owned alcohol factories where he might be employed one day as a chemist if he needed a job. Chargaff spent 5 years studying at the University of Vienna. In the summer of 1928, aged 23, he graduated with a PhD in chemistry. Overall, he said he disliked chemistry much less than he had expected to. His thesis was about organic silver complexes and the reaction of iodine with azites. While studying for his doctorate, Chargaff inquired about papers published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, but he was told not to bother. Nobody ever published anything useful in it. The 1920s were unstable times in Austria. Inflation was rampant, reaching 2,500% in 1922. In 1927, there were serious riots in Vienna. Meanwhile, the universities were producing far more graduates than there were jobs. Arrested in America. The path of least resistance seemed to be to continue with chemistry, but not in Austria. Chargaff made a successful application for the Milton Campbell Research Fellowship in Organic Chemistry. Despite earlier being told that no useful chemistry was done in America, he was soon sailing for New York. Arriving in the fall of 1928, rather than receiving a warm welcome, he was held pending deportation. An immigration officer had noticed that Chargaff's title was doctor. The officer reasoned that if Chargaff was a doctor, then the student visa he was using must be viewed with suspicion. After spending a few uncomfortable days on Ellis Island, Chargaff was rescued by Treat Johnson, professor of chemistry at Yale University. Between 1928 and 1930, Chargaff worked successfully with Yale's Rudolf Anderson, publishing 7 papers, discovering 2 branched-chain fatty acids, and studying the tuberculosis bacterium. Unfortunately, he and his Austrian wife grew homesick. Life in America was depressing. They returned to Europe in the summer of 1930. Berlin. Chargaff spent 2.5 years in Berlin. carrying out independent research at the University of Berlin's Institute of Hygiene. He was exceptionally happy during this period, although he noted that Berlin was a city of tremendous contrasts, cultural splendor parading itself uneasily in a city troubled by financial turmoil and political unrest.